Last week you saw us scan, model and 3D print an entire 1973 arcade cabinet. And not just any cabinet, it was the extremely rare Atari Space Race, originally a fiberglass model, which is why it lends itself so well to this 3D print process. We saw Richard print all of those pieces down in the 3D print farm and construct what you described in the comments as an Elmer the Elephant style cabinet. A huge amount of skill and work has already gone into this project, and there's a whole lot more, but I promise you we will be finishing the project in today's episode. And there is Richard, smoothing out, layering up, sanding down the cabinet to try and get a really smooth finish before we paint it and move on to that resin process. We're also going to learn today about the CRT that we're going to put in there, the hardware that's going to power the game, and everything else besides, to take this up to a finish replica. So I won't keep you any longer. Let's get straight back into where we left off last time with Richard.
Now we have the machine nicely sanded. We've sanded down all of that filler and grab adhesive. That mixture was basically standard filler you would use to fill holes in your walls, and it produces a really tough surface that you can then add a sealant into a little bit later on. But the first thing we need to do before we put any sealant or any paint on this machine is to create a back door. I decided to only make one door on the back. The original has two strange doors, one at the top and one at the bottom, but it was going to make access a lot easier with just the one door. The next thing to go in is a shelf. This is quite important because it needs to support the weight of the monitor. And to reinforce that shelf, I have some solid beams of wood that go right from the bottom all the way up to the shelf to keep it all nice and solid and in place.
The cabinet is taking shape now, and we get to see on the inside the space that we've got to work with. And we can start to think about how we can make this the most authentic experience possible for players and the hardware that we're going to put in here. So a big part of that, of course, is the display. Let's go and see Holly now, who's in the room next door where we keep the CRTs, trying to pick a monitor that will be just right for this project. Let's see what she's found.
So we've been through the monitors and we've picked this one. It's a 12-inch screen. It's a Sony model SSM12 1CE, which is a black and white monitor with composite input. Not really a PVM, it was a security monitor, because it's the closest to what Atari would have used. They would have used black and white TV, ripped it out and converted it. We do have some that are like that, but we don't have any that are sort of nice enough and the right sort of size. The TVs, they'd have been RF, so they've had to be modified for a composite input. It's got multiple switchable inputs, and I expect whatever Richard puts in the machine will be 100% compatible with composite, so this will work.
Now the sealant layer can go on, and this has just got a small amount of paint just so I can see where I'm going. So I'm sanding down that first layer of sealant just so we get everything as smooth as possible before we put the second sealant layer on, and then after that we can get into the painting. After a quick dust, the second sealant layer can be put on. Again, this has got just a little bit of paint in just so I can see where I'm going so I don't miss anything. And then we can put our first layer of green paint on. This is just standard emulsion paint. It goes on really well with the sealed surface. You're effectively painting a wall at this point.
One of the ways we're able to keep the lights on in the cave is thanks to the support of PCBWay.com. If you're interested in today's episode, you will no doubt be interested in the services that they offer, including PCB manufacturing, of course, CNC milling, 3D printing, and their shared projects section, in which you'll find plenty of retro and vintage computing projects that you can order with just one click. I'd like to thank PCBWay.com for supporting the Retro Collective. Go and check them out at PCBWay.com. Sadly, we don't have an original Space Race system board. Those are just as rare as the cabinets, of course. But we know a man who does. Ed Fries, who we spoke to in the first episode, tells us here just a little something that makes the original system board so special. Let's take a look.
I do have a board here. I don't know if you've seen the PCB that goes with this game. So it's a pretty simple board, but the really special thing is that just like computer space, this is before there were ROMs to store the data for the graphics. So the graphics are done just with diodes. In this case, they've made the ship. It's just like, do you see that? Yeah. So it's mirrored in in the hardware, but that's half of the spaceship on there. It just is. So it's like a little diode ROM. Yeah. So I thought you might appreciate that. The same thing is true for computer space, by the way. And if you haven't seen that before, you should look it up, because the computer space one's even neater because it has the little UFO, but then it also has a bunch of rotations of the ship, all done in diodes on one of the 4 printed circuit boards that are in computer space. So.
Such a cool board, isn't it, with that spaceship shape on the diodes. And our cabinet is made in such a way that if we ever do get hold of a board, an original board, by some miracle, we can drop it in the cabinet, we can connect it up and we can use it. Until then, we're going to have to emulate Space Race. Not a difficult task because it was all TTL logic back in the day. There's not a CPU on that board. So this is massively overpowered for the job, but we're going to use it because it's the Mr. Multi-System by Heba. Of course, Richard works for Heba right here in this building. They produce the multi-system, which is available at their shop. And that will give players the best experience we can possibly hope to give them, short of finding an original board. So we've got our guts. Let's go back to Richard now and see how he's getting on with the resin coating, and then we can put everything inside it and figure out which one of us is the best at Space Frogger. Space Race. Space Race.
The next stage is what I've been looking forward to, and that's getting on the glitter resin finish. Really enjoyed that last time when doing it on the computer space machine, and I learned a lot about how to apply and how to put on the resin. You've got to keep it moving, you've got to keep pulling it back up, stop it falling down. So we've got a few techniques now which I can refine on this machine. I've got some lovely green glitter that I'm going to use for this machine, which should make it look just like Ed's machine, hopefully when we're finished. I'm only going to use a tiniest little bit of the diamond glitter, and we have a little bit of green tint we're going to use. This time I've also gone really big on the resin, so I've got a huge amount of resin. I intend to use more on this machine than I did on computer space, so we've got a nice thick coating. So may have to do it in 2 applications, but first of all tonight I'm going to try and get a coat on the entire machine and see how it goes, see how it looks with the glitter coat. The main thing I learned about computer space and putting the resin on was that you really need to do it all in one go. If you try to do one side, you get drips. If you try to do only just sort of half the machine, you'll create an edge that you really just can't blend in with the next layer. So you do have to do the entire machine in one go. I did do this with a very thin coat of resin, and this resin itself was actually thinner, so it ran a little bit more fluidly than the original resin I used on the previous machine. That was quite good though, because it did create a nice even coat. The glitter was quite sparse, but what I wanted to do here was to just get a solid coat of resin on, because adding more coats on top makes it a lot easier once you've got that first coat in place. I still needed to spend about another 2 hours gently pulling the resin up and down and keeping everything as fluid as possible until it got to a point where it really wasn't running anymore. After that, you just need to leave it for around 2 to 3 days so it fully goes hard.
And with it now hardened, it was all hands on deck with the team down in the arcade archive. Richard, Holly, Dan, and volunteer Tony was in to help us as well to put it all together. Dan, our resident sticker expert, has produced these replicas, and there is the bezel artwork with the Space Race logo going on there. Our serial number is RC for Retro Collective 0001, because 0 is our computer space replica that came before it. And then Richard and I are going to test out the Mr. Multi-System with that Sony black and white monitor that Holly's picked out for us.
Well, we don't want to lose any features.
Is there any more contrast to that? Is it just black and white?
Yeah, we've got contrast. Yeah.
The multi-system's doing its job and it's set to auto boot straight into the game. And it looks nice, but it's when I turn the lights down, just as this would be when it's in the arcade proper, that we can really capture the beauty of the phosphor on the CRT monitor. What would look like a simple pixel, just a single dot for an asteroid on an LCD, becomes an asteroid streaking across a night sky with that phosphor glowing in its wake. It's absolutely beautiful, just stunning stuff. Now the controls are going to be an essential part of this project for a good experience, for people to feel like they're playing the original game. And hidden away inside this joystick are some very unusual parts and of course some 3D printing, as Richard explains now.
So the bases we've got here, they've been 3D printed around 80% infill, so they're really nice and solid. I needed to find some way for a joystick handle and I ended up using this D-bolt. We've got a bolt that runs through there to give you the up and down motion, because we've only actually got up and down on each one of these player controls, but it has to be nice. It has to feel like you're piloting a rocket ship. So what I've done with this is use bearings either side. So they'll sit on here like this, and we'll have the bearings the other side with the bolt, and that'll give you a nice up and down motion of the flight stick. The other thing I noticed in Ed's photographs of the original machine was that the handle was nice and shiny. So what I've done with this, 3D printed again at very high density with a threaded insert actually cut into the 3D printed material that can be screwed on. So after we've got all these parts of the joystick assembled, this was sanded and then coated in resin to give it a really nice shiny look. The only other things I need to do are obviously fit the micro switches. So I've got a little wiring loom made up, which is just up and down. Have to use these types of micro switches with the lever on. And that's quite important because in the test, I did a test assembly and didn't use the ones, and it wasn't quite nice enough with the up and down motion. Often it would skip. So with the little lever, that needs to be just bent over a little bit to make sure you've got the right motion, and then that should give us a really nice feeling joystick. Hey, there we go. That's nice. And then we can put our cap on and screw the joystick all the way down. And they sit in the Space Race cabinet on a slight angle. That's how the original is also configured. So they're like that, well, that way around. And you move up and down to fly the spaceship up the screen and down the screen. So hopefully that'll give us what we need.
There are some other inputs on the machine. So there is the coin mech here, which does accept our Arcade Archive tokens, or you can just press the coin return button on the front and that will give you a credit. We're nearly there now. Holly's trained eye was not 100% happy with the image she saw on the CRT, so she's making a few tweaks here. And just look at the resin on that cabinet. Every time we twist it or turn it or give you a different angle and the light catches it slightly differently, it's such a nice finish. In goes the perspex for the monitor. No fingerprints on that, please, Dan. And behind that sits a bezel. That bezel, black bezel there, wasn't on the original, but we just thought it gave it a nice finish and stopped distracting from anything else that you might see through the glass. If you saw that patchwork on the inside, it might be a bit distracting. And then in goes the coin mech. All of these parts are really well secured. Of course, Richard's designed it with millimeter precision, but it also clamps in really nicely from the inside, so there's no movement on any of this. It's a really solid finish. The multi-system slides in on this tray for easy removal should we need to tinker with it. And finally, that monitor goes into place, and it goes into place at exactly the same viewing angle as the laser scan showed us the original was, thanks to Ed Freeze's input. Richard then puts on the back door, locks it shut, and it is ready to play. So let's get it into the arcade and enjoy the finished Space Race in all its beauty. And we've got the perfect spot for it, right next to our other replica, Computer Space, two of the most striking arcades in the museum and a great way to start learning about the story of arcade video games if you pay us a visit. The chunkier glitter finish in the Space Race really catches well in the lights. The two joysticks, well, they just look so much more approachable and inviting than Computer Space's control panel. You just want to walk up to it and play it. Lessons had certainly been learned in the nearly 2 years between their release dates, and it's actually quite a fun game to play. And that monitor is great. If anything, we can actually turn the brightness down even more on that monitor now we're in the main arcade room, so I will tweak that a little bit more.
I must admit, this is quite good. Oh!
It's one I can spend time with. Oh, West Street, one shot.
I think what we're all looking forward to the most though is just standing back and seeing people try this out for themselves when they come and visit the arcade archive. I'd like to thank Ed Freeze for helping to make this episode possible, for lighting a rocket up Richard, the whole team at the Retro Collective, who you'll be seeing a lot more of this year, and more on that in the very next video, and of course Richard for his tireless work, his skill and his effort in creating this. It's always a joy to watch his creations come to life here at the mill. And wouldn't it be terrible if you set him a challenge, if you left a comment right now asking him to create something, or even worse, telling him you don't think he could create a particular arcade machine? You know that will get him going. So get your thinking hats on. Until next time, please do subscribe. Head to retrocollective.co.uk if you'd like to book a visit to see this for yourself, and check out the link to our Patreon page in the video description if you'd like to support what we do, support projects like this through Patreon. And until next time, take care, and I'll see you then. Bye bye.